And what is up, everybody? Okay, if you notice the slight echo, if you're wondering where I am right now, this is my new laboratory. Not finished being set up, but not too bad either. This closet, it's in my own brand new apartment, to which first apartment that I've ever had all to myself, here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what's happening is, like, this is my office now. This closet was big enough to have, my computer desk in, and I'm gonna build upon it a little bit more for as long as I'm here. So that being said, this video is about not UFC gym, but the UFC in general. They just finished, UFC's YouTube channel just started putting out some of the old fights and the old events. And then, of course, these little mini documentaries, stuff that they used to have exclusively for, the UFC Fight Pass. For some reason, they decided to just let a bunch of stuff out for free. But a bunch of these little mini documentaries, and I love watching documentaries of people who've been to where I'm trying to go. I tried doing my own mixed martial arts promotion. So there's this one documentary they called, that I don't know how long it's been out. I think it just came out. It's called A Matter of Pride. Right? It goes into the rivalry between the UFC and Pride Fighting Championship at the time. Pride was, no ifs and buts, the best organization in the planet in its heyday. But this is more. This is they go into eventually the 2003 Grand Prix, the 2003 light heavyweight Grand Prix, or the middleweight Grand Prix, as it was in Pride. They basically try to make it look as if that the executives of Pride were trying to protect Wanderlei Silva from Chuck Liddell. And ultimately, this is what this little documentary turned out to be. It's like 22 minutes long, and that's what they were trying to make it out to be. It was about, oh yeah, Chuck versus Wanderlei, that it couldn't happen at the time. And it wasn't even that. I mean, looking at Chuck Liddell at that time, looking at Wanderlei at that time, I did not think for one second that Wanderlei Wanderlei was going to lose to Chuck. To me, there was just no way that was going to happen. They try to say that, oh yeah, of course they put Chuck against, the toughest guys, and Alistair Overeem. Sakuraba was a pretty tough dude. And who was the next dude that Wanderlei fought? Hirohiko Yoshida? Olympic gold medalist in judo? He's a very, very tough fight for Wanderlei. So what are you trying to say? That they gave him the easy fights. Now, I believe Yoshida and Sakuraba beat Quentin Jackson, who ultimately beat Chuck in the semifinals of that tournament. But supposedly Wanderlei had the easier fights. Oh, he got set up with all the tough ones, and they were at opposite ends of the bracket. It would have been interesting if they'd have put the two of them up first. But Dana White making these guarantees that, oh yeah, if Chuck fights, for a long time, every time Dana White says he guarantees something, he loses. The man's The man's hometown is Las Vegas. And every time he makes a bet, he loses. I don't get it. I don't get it. The only guarantee that he ever said was that the only way Kimbo was coming into the UFC is if he goes through the Ultimate Fighter, and I guarantee he's not going to win it. That was the only time he guaranteed something, and it went down that way. So the end of this little documentary is like, oh yeah, in June of 2007, Pride was bought out by UFC. And December 29th, 2007, fans finally got to see the dream match of Chuck versus Wanderlei. Both these men lost their championships. Wanderlei lost the Pride middleweight belt, and Chuck was no longer light heavyweight champion. And then they just show Chuck basically, they don't even show enough of the fight. Granted, yeah, no offense and buts, Chuck won that fight. But they made it look like Chuck did it so easily. And then also failed to mention the fact that Wanderlei had a crushed septum his last 3 fights. His fight against Dan Henderson, which he lost. Actually, it wasn't even that. He lost to they were originally supposed to fight while both of them were still champ. And it was supposed to be for the UFC light heavyweight championship. And it was called off because Wanderlei lost in the Absolute Grand Prix to a heavyweight. Granted, he showed up I think 4 pounds heavier than Crow Cop, but got knocked out viciously by Crow Cop. Wanderlei then tries defending his title against Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson manages to beat him this time, despite losing horribly the first time they fought. Now, Wanderlei can't even breathe through his nose. He's not even able to breathe. That thing you need to be able to do while you're in the middle of a professional fight? Couldn't breathe against Dan Henderson. Couldn't breathe against Chuck. Couldn't breathe. Managed to knock out Keith Jardine. Keith Jardine's not that good. And Keith Jardine managed to pull off a few lucky wins. And then loses to Rich Franklin before getting the surgery done and moving down to 185 pounds, which he kind of did a little bit better. And his last fight in UFC, of course, was against Brian Stann, which he knocked Brian Stann out cold. They don't mention that with Wanderlei. They don't mention the fact that Chuck was fighting a man that couldn't breathe. And they definitely didn't mention the absolute ownage that Quentin Rampage Jackson did to Chuck just before his, 2 fights before his fight with Wanderlei. Failed to mention the fact that he just got absolutely destroyed by Quentin Jackson for a second time. And then losing immediately after to Keith Jardine, who's not that good a fighter. Then he manages to beat a man who wasn't able to breathe the whole time that he was fighting. And, that's it. That's the end of it. Are you freaking kidding me? I'm not taking anything away from Chuck Liddell, because Wanderlei, he should have known better. He should have had the cert. He should have done what he needed to do. But just like with Shogun when he went up against when just like Shogun when he went up against Forrest Griffin the first time. He was still suffering a knee injury. Shouldn't have taken that fight, but he did anyway. Why? You need money. Manny Pacquiao, torn rotator cuff. Someone's like, someone tried to tell me, like, oh yeah, if he was injured, then he shouldn't have fought Floyd Mayweather, and miss out on $120 million. For $120 million, I'll fight Floyd Mayweather tomorrow. So if this is what you do for a living, you don't want to put it off. It's driving me bananas right now, because for somebody like me, I have a torn rotator cuff. But then last year, January, I found out I have herniated discs in my neck. And being a jiu-jitsu fighter, where so much stuff happens with your neck, it's not a good idea to fight, let alone train. But fighting was like my only therapy. For me. So it's tough. It's tough for me, especially since I can't do what I love doing. My last fight, I got robbed for the decision, and then because I couldn't fight, I had my boy Kelvin step in, for the since I couldn't take the rematch that I accepted because of this injury. I have my boy Kelvin step in, and Kelvin finishes the dude no problem, and this dude wants to hang it up. That's the end of it. And it's like, so I'm robbed of my rematch as well. It's like you got so for Wanderlei to keep fighting, I understand that. For why these injured, there's a big difference between being medically cleared and 100%. And there's no test, and I guess there's no test for medical screening to be like, well, okay, are you able to breathe through your nose? They don't really do that. It's like, oh yeah, take a deep breath. As long as you're breathing, that's all they really care about. The fact that they don't mention that. They don't mention the absolute ownage by Quentin Jackson, and they don't. That's not. The story was very one-sided. So and not to mention the fact that was every other fight, which eventually led to Chuck Liddell retiring, which was Quentin Jackson, Keith Jardine, Wanderlei Silva, Rashad Evans, Shogun, Rich Franklin. The Wanderlei Silva fight was the only fight that he was able to win, because Wanderlei Silva couldn't breathe through his nose. And again, not taking anything away from Chuck, because this is a guy who would fight anybody, anytime, any place that didn't matter. And they're trying to say that basically trying to play the whole pride is crooked card. I don't know how many times people try to say, oh yeah, Pride's fights were fixed. Really? Oh yeah, they were owned by the Yakuza. Really? Well, as racist as Japanese people, not even the Yakuza, as racist as Japanese people are in general, they're gonna fix fights so that only 2 Japanese fighters, of all the fighters that they had, only 2 of them were capable of being champion? All the weight classes they had, all the fighters that they had, only one of them was the regular lightweight champion. The only other one that was a champion managed to win the 2006 middleweight Grand Prix. Those are the only 2 Japanese champions that Pride has ever had. But the fights were fixed. The hell sense does that make? Chuck, like I said, can't take anything away from him. I think, obviously a tough dude. Dispatched a lot, dispatched some pretty big names in the game. Kevin Randleman, Ian Freeman, Marilla Bustamante, friggin' did he? I don't remember whether or not he, but Randy Couture, Tito Ortiz, some huge names within UFC's pantheon, within MMA's pantheon. So not taking anything away from him, but to discredit Wanderlei, who was, no ifs, ands, or buts, the number one, and in my opinion still, because John Jones is like a majority, like a majority of his title defenses were against men who were the top fighters in the 205-pound division the previous decade. And then how I mentioned how he had trouble, he had trouble with Alexander Gustafsson, and he had trouble against Daniel Cormier. So was it a coincidence he was caught juicing just before his rematches with Cormier and Gustafsson? Is that a coincidence? Versus a Wanderlei Silva who beat the snot out of anybody and everybody they put in front of him. Yes, he had some losses. Had no problem going up against heavyweights or super heavyweights like a Mark Hunt, like a Fujita, like a Crow Cop. Not taking anything away from him. Can't take anything away from him. Can't take anything away from Chuck. But that's what that video was trying to do. I don't agree with it. Nobody should agree with it. I'm done talking. You guys have a good night.